The first one up is Recommended Draft Policy 2015-2, modify 8.4 Inter-RIR transfers for specified recipients. This policy proposal was proposed in May 2015 as Proposition 216. The Shepherds, the two AC members who helped lead it through the process, are Kathy Aronson and Chris Tassett. It's been at 2 public policy meetings and 2 consultations. It was revised in February 2016, again in April, and again in May. It was recommended for adoption by the ARIN Advisory Council in May 2016. So it could be moved to last call after this meeting. The text is in your discussion guide and available on the web. Staff understanding. Currently, organizations are unable to act as a source in an 8.4, an inter-RIR transfer of IPv4 address space if they have received an IPv4 address space in the last 12 months from ARIN's free pool, or from the waiting list for unmet requests, or via an 8.3 transfer. This draft policy lifts the 12-month restriction in cases where the source of the recipient entity owns or controls each other, or both are under common ownership or control. If the policy was implemented, ARIN staff would no longer apply the 12-month time restriction to organizations who wish an 8.4 transfer to themselves, or in cases where the source or recipient entity owns or controls the other, or both under common ownership or control. The policy proposal could be implemented as written. And then the legal assessment, General Counsel raised concerns in the previous versions, but they've been addressed. We don't have material legal issues with this. In order to determine whether entities are under common ownership or control, traditional legal standards would be applied. Resource, it'd be a minimal resource impact to implement this within ARIN. As typical, it would occur within 3 months after ratification by the Board of Trustees. We'd have to update the guidelines and internal procedures and do some staff training. That's it. I'm now going to turn around and bring Chris Tassett up to do the AC presentation.
Thank you very much. So you've already heard the problem statement. Basically, the anti-flip provisions are an impediment to the ability to export IP addresses that have been either acquired under Parts 4 or 8 of the NIRPM, and it was acknowledged that global network providers need to be able to do that, not because of restrictions that ARIN imposes, but because of restrictions that other RIRs have for requiring you to import addresses in their regions if you want to use them. So the problem was the word transfer in the policy statement, which triggered the anti-flip provisions in these circumstances. So various legal solutions or various solutions involving legal terminology were considered along the way. I won't get into the whole history, but at the last ARIN meeting, the proposed text that you see on the screen is what was reviewed. I should add that bullet 4 there should actually say bullet 3 for 8.4 in the recipient portion. That's just an error that was caught this morning and brought to my attention. Thank you for that. In the end, there wasn't really any big discussion as a result of this proposed text, although there was a suggestion to make an editorial change. You've already heard about the staff and legal, so I won't go through that again. There was pretty much widespread support at ARIN-37 for the suggested text, except for the editorial change that was proposed just to clarify the relationship among the source and recipient. And so the proposal was moved to recommended draft, as you heard, and this is now the current text of that replacement bullet, which will be 3, not 4. The red text is the new text. So basically what it does is creates an exception to the anti-flip provision in case there is an affiliation relationship or common control relationship among the source and the recipient, because under those circumstances it's believed that there isn't really a material risk of fraud by circumventing the anti-flip provision. There hasn't been any additional feedback from the community since that last editorial change was posted. So the questions that we have for you now are, is the text now sufficiently clear for the proposal to be implemented as policy, and are there any other last-minute concerns or issues?
Thank you. Chris?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Just going to mention, in your slide deck, after this, there's a bunch of slides that deal with the history of the proposal, but I'm not going to go through them here.
Oh, okay. All right, so this is our first recommended draft policy. So just as a reminder for those that have been around and also those new, this is a very important time for you to come to one of the microphones located here in the middle, and there's 2 there at the sides. Please come and give any comments you have about the proposal. Please start with your name and affiliation. And then I'd ask if you could state whether you support or do not support the policy as it's written, and then give any comments or statements you may have. It's very important that we get as many people, me too, or just I support or I don't support, is also really useful feedback. And with that, we will go to microphone number 1. The gentleman on the far, I'm sorry if I can't see you that well. There are 8 lights very bright pointed at me, so it's a little hard to see in the back. So
my voice will probably help you.
There you
Kevin
go.
Bloomberg, The Wire, NRO-NC. I support the policy as it's written, and I would actually like to point out this is part of the external, the global allowance for policy for space to move from our region and out, and vice versa, which has now become trilateral. Before it was just bilateral, it's now trilateral, and at some point it might even be more people. My understanding, and I'd love clarification from the other regions, is that we have the most restrictive policy in this case, that the other regions don't have this anti-flip in there. So this would actually bring us in line with what is going on in the other regions, which I think is important. I believe that it's important for us to all have similar policies and procedures. So that's why I support this policy.
So you'd like input from the other regions, or you think?
As long as what I've just said, in that other regions do not have this restriction in place, if that is the case, I don't need to hear from them. But if I am wrong in that assumption, having talked to some people, I would like them to come to the mic if possible.
Okay. Thank you. Well, so if someone would love to approach on that, please do. Center microphone.
Owen DeLong, Akamai ARIN Advisory Council. I'm speaking in opposition of the policy. While it is unlikely that a related party would transfer space to another region in contravention of the anti-flip provisions directly, because Kevin is correct, this provides a tremendous avenue for those that wish to do an end run on our anti-flip provisions that we crafted carefully for very good reasons, and I therefore oppose the policy on that basis. It does not provide adequate protection.
Sorry, before you go, so is there a change that you'd propose that would be amenable, or you're just
No,
not?
I oppose the policy concept.
Thank you for the feedback. Center rear microphone.
Andrew Delahaye, RIPE NCC. Just to come back to the request we just received. We have a 24-month ruling, so that's one. Secondly, the ruling is based on the prefix and not on the account. So there's a small difference there.
Thank you for that input. Others who would like to comment on the policy, please approach the microphone. Rear microphone, center.
Hi, Ray Bennett, Google. I like the policy. That's all I had to say.
Sorry, you cut off a little bit up here.
Yes,
Thank
support.
you. Sorry.
Thanks.
President?
So we have 15 ARIN Advisory Council members who work really hard on making good policy. and they're capable of doing it completely on their own, but they really try not to. And the difference between them doing it on their own and them doing it on behalf of the community is getting the community to come up and speak about what they think of policy proposals, whether they support them or whether they're against them, and if so, why, and could it be changed. It's really important for the folks in the room to express their views. So, microphones remain open.
And with that, we'll go to front center.
Hi there, Donnie Roisman with SoftLayer. I was wondering, do we have any sense of how many people this policy change really applies to? Are we fixing a corner case for 1, 2, 3 organizations, or is this really a common, prevalent problem that we think we need to solve?
I don't know if John Sweeting or John Kern would like to answer. Go ahead, John.
So recognize that particularly large organizations that are multinational, within the ARIN region are capable of removing their addresses between business units under 8.2 reorganization, and it's routine to do so. The moment they go outside of the boundary of ARIN's region, presently they trigger the anti-flip provisions. Is that common? It may only be half a dozen a year that we've had people approach, but that's only people who have approached us. That's not people who have just decided to cope with it and leave with the registration in the wrong organization or the wrong business unit. So it is a fairly common occurrence for large multinational organizations. We only actually hear about them coming to us and getting upset a few times a year.
Thank you.
Did that address your question? Yeah, you want?
I mean, it sounds like you don't necessarily have very firm data, but it makes sense why you wouldn't.
Okay, could you hold on 1 second? Go ahead. Yeah.
I would just add, too, that it is possible to do this through a different mechanism, which is using 8.2 and 8.4 improperly. And so what this does is regularize something that should exist to meet the needs of global networks instead of trying to, dance around the policy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Paul from APNIC?
Paul Wilson from APNIC. Did I hear it correctly that this policy is justified by the perception that other RIRs insist that IP addresses be transferred to that RIR's registry in order to be used in that RIR's region?
It's probably more NIRs than RIRs, but the problem remains.
If it's NIRs, then maybe that applies to APNIC, but I'm just not aware of those circumstances. If there's an NIR case, I'd be interested to know what that is. But
Kathy, I see you very rapidly approaching a microphone. Did you?
Well, this is Kathy. Probably the person better to speak to this is sitting right next to me, but I believe it was more of a country issue, not an NIR or LIR issue, but that certain countries require you to have your address space in the RIR associated with that country before you can route it in the region.
Thank you for that, Kathy. All right. What's the order?
If I can clarify that a little bit more.
Okay, please, Owen.
Owen DeLong, ARIN Advisory Council, and Akamai. Specifically, the most common places where this occurs are China and South Korea, where they, in order to get your space routed within the country, insist on having it within their NIR. And especially in the case of CNNIC, space goes in, but it can't come out.
Thank you. That's very useful clarifications on the requirement for the proposal.
Hi, Chris Woodfield on Twitter. I was wondering if you could clarify for me. I've read, after reading the anti-flip provisions in the section, it's still unclear to me what ownership ARIN maintains over that allocation after it is transferred to another RIR. There's no ownership whatsoever? So the ARIN no longer has any jurisdiction over the use or subsequent transfers of that space. Is that correct?
You used the word ownership. I'm going to try to...
Stewardship.
Let's start out. So an IP address block is an entry in the Internet Numbers Registry System, which is a single registry that 5 RIRs coordinate. Okay? So, collectively, the 5 RIRs maintain the full registry, but people have rights to various entries. we stop paying attention to address block entries that are no longer in our management. Once it's been transferred to the stewardship of another RIR, we are no longer watching them. The problem, though, is that the act presently of receiving address space via a transfer, even if it's just a reorganization between affiliated business units, could prevent you from being able to do any subsequent transfer for 12 months. So it's not that ARIN is in somehow affecting that address block that moved to another region or moved into ARIN. It's that that organization is under a constraint working with ARIN for a period of 12 months.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Scott, anything on the tubes? Nothing coming from the remote. So if you would like to comment on this policy proposal, which again is a recommended draft policy, Dan, not to put you on the spot, could you just explain how the AC will deal with this based on the vote? What would be the next step for the policy? For those new that might not be familiar with the intricate of the PDP.
So since this isn't a recommended state, based on this feedback, based on the input from the mailing list, based on all the discussions, the AC has to take all of this into consideration and decide whether or not we have enough of a consensus to move this forward and recommend it for adoption. If we were to recommend this for adoption, we have 60 days after this public policy meeting to do so, in which case we would send it to a last call period where everyone would then have a final say in the change. Then once that happens, based on any input there, the AC then decides if we want to send it to the board for ratification.
So this may be the last in-person opportunity to comment. So with that, I will put a last call on comments to the microphone. If you'd like to comment, please approach a microphone now, or please, if you're remote, start typing feverishly.
Hi, David Huberman from Oracle. So there are operators who have a real need for this type of a policy. This is real. And I would rather we consider policy in light of actual operational need rather than in show it fear. It's important to recognize that the 8.4 anti-flip language as it is essentially no op. And while the folks in this room who deal with IP addressing and ARIN and the registries regularly as part of their jobs understand that, others outside may not. And so the provisions as they exist have some utility. But without this, large operators or operators who operate in multiple countries on multiple continents have to go through a lot of make work with ARIN, and it's all just show. So as Mr. Tassett very elegantly put it, we're just streamlining what the policy should be.
And you are in support then?
Strongly.
Thank you. Microphones will be closing momentarily. I will take one more microphone over there, and if you are not standing in front of a microphone or typing feverishly by the time Kevin finishes comments, that is when the microphones will close. So it's last call. Kevin.
Kevin Bloomberg. So I'd like to actually thank Representative Wright, because they pointed out a fundamental difference. And I think as you get larger, that plays more into it. ARIN blocks an entire org, correct me if I'm wrong, for 12 months. The larger you get, the transactions you do, the more that 12 months gets reset and reset and reset. In the Wright region, it's just the address record that gets blocked, and a large org can then do the things that they need to do. So I think that now that we've just run out 12 months ago, and now that we're in that position, we're starting to see some of the failings is too strong a word, but we're starting to see some of the assumptions that we made originally in our language for our region when it comes to the transfer market and out of region, starting to play in once actual use happens.
Thank you, Kevin. The microphones are now closed. Chris, did you want any final comments?
Nope, thank you very much.
Let's thank Chris for his presentation. Thank you very much. All right, it's audience participation time. If I could get my counters to give a sign, just because, again, it's very bright. Okay, we see them. Thank you. So I will be asking a question. Anybody who can hear the sound of my voice, whether in this room or remotely, has the ability to participate in this. So by raising your hand, the question I will ask will be whether or not you're in favor or against the advisory council moving forward with this policy as it has been presented to you today. So first ask for the yeses and nos. So if the online can start voting, and all those that are in favor, please raise your hand nice and high and keep it high. That's it. Oh, there we go. Don't be shy. And just keep it. We just need to give. And we're just going to give a few moments also for online. Please keep them up until we get the thumbs up. We're not trying to torture you. Thank you. You may lower them. And I would ask now those that are opposed, the nays, please raise your hand nice and high. Thank you. You may lower them, so just one moment while we await the tabulation of the results. Any public service announcements, John, while we're waiting? Or?
No.
Anything interesting happening in your country this month? Next month?
Yes.
We really got to work on our banter, John. All right, I see the envelope making its way down the aisle. There's actually no envelope, but it sounds better that way, so. All right, on the matter of draft policy 2015-2, Inter-RIR transfers to specified recipients. In the room and online, 130 people. In favor, 46. Against, 1. This information is being provided immediately to the AC for their consideration. Thank you very much.